GM, you know what it is. Welcome to Flywheel, your number one source for everything Frax, DeFi, and everything in between. If you want to know what's going on in the world on chain, you've come to the right place. This is DeFiDave here with capital K, and we are here to help you harness the power of the Flywheel. And on this episode, we get into the stack, we get creative, because in the world of proof of stake, it brings a whole new element, whole new set of variables that one may consider when rehypothecating, refinancializing these LSTs. And Kit, I'll let you preface this conversation we had with Chunda Mccain of Ion Protocol, because we get super technical on this one. And so before we dive in, I think our listeners and our viewers at home should get a little bit more context.
Correct. So we're going to be talking about Ion Protocol, and effectively they have two product lines. The first one is think of it as like a data layer. They are almost like an oracle for the beacon chain. But aside from just querying, how much ETH is in a validator, they would also query, say, what kind of tech stack the validator is using. And there's a term called DVT, which stands for Decentralized Validator Technology. So as the name suggests, it's a set of parameters that determines what type of technology the validator is utilizing in their running of the nodes. So that's the first product. So it acts as like an oracle that will pull in these parameters. And then it's not just like, the quantity or what kind of tech stack, but also like where the validator has been, what kind of historic performance the validator has. So it's much, much more and much more robust. So that's product number one. And why is that important? Well, with proof of stake becoming more and a larger and larger portion, or rather more stakers coming online, ergo more validators coming online, we need to find a way to make sure that these validators are up to par. And not only that, they're good actors in the space, and we have a provable way to show and track these parameters. That is Ion Protocol's data layer. Now, to dog food themselves, they decided to build the very first product out all ETH, ALL ETH, that is a lending protocol to utilize the data oracle that they've created. So they're dog fooding themselves. And we'll get deeper into how this product works during the pod. But for now, just think of it as a way for a LSD token holder, say FrxETH, FrxETH, or whatnot, to borrow against their validators. And it is effectively liquidation risk-free, given that it's not tracked to price, or rather it's price liquidation risk-free because it's not linked to price, but rather it's linked to like the slashing or the reducing of the quantity of ETH, not the price of ETH.
TLDR, Ion Protocol introduces a new way to underwrite LST loans based on validator risk instead of traditional DeFi economic risk. That's how I put it. All right, before we get into this episode, full disclosure, I am a small angel investor in Ion Protocol. I originally met Chunda in Montenegro at Zuzulu. Thought what he was doing was great, so went and put in my support. But without further ado, let's get into this episode. But before we do, make sure you go and subscribe to our YouTube. Do that right now. Hit that bell button. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Give us a like. Make sure you follow us on the big three: Twitter, TikTok, Telegram. That's T-cubed at Flywheel DeFi. You heard that right. At Flywheel DeFi. Telegram, Twitter, TikTok, TTT. Make sure you subscribe to us at our website, flywheeldefi.com. Acquire exclusive access to show notes and more with a friend tech key of Flywheel DeFi. Make sure, go and support us. And you can follow me on Twitter at DeFiDave22.
Follow me at 0xcapital_K.
Shout out Chuck Beard for the fan. Thank you. And let's get the flywheel spinning. Do you hold ETH but don't know what to do with it? Want to earn those juicy liquid staking derivative yields but don't know where to start? Well, FrxETH is there for you. FrxETH is Frax's native LSD solution, allowing you to earn boosted yields in multiple ways on your ETH. If you want to get started, go to app.frax.finance and turn your ETH into FrxETH today. All right, everyone. We're so back. It's Flywheel. I'm your host, DeFiDave. I'm here with capital K, who is absolutely thriving at KBW. Look at that champ. Look at that smile. He is glowing right now.
This week needs to be over.
It feels like Korean Blockchain Month. but without further ado, I am really, really excited with this episode because we have on Mr. Chunda Mccain, who is the founder of Ion Protocol, who I think is probably one of the most articulate people in the space. Like when I first, Chunda, when I first met you, I know I'm being genuine, I'm being serious. When I first met you in Montenegro at Zuzulu, and like we were talking, I didn't know what I was like getting into when you were talking about like Ion and like what you were like building, and then the way you explained it, it just made sense, and you were just so eloquent and simple with your delivery and how you explained it. I was like, oh, like this is like obvious, and like I wasn't like looking. I was just like, and then I was just like, how can I support? And I ended up like being like a small angel because I was just like super impressed with what you were building, and like I knew I wanted to have you on the pod at some point, and it was just waiting for the right timing. And the stars have aligned. Astrology has told me, no, not really. The stars have aligned for you to come on right now. So Chunda, thank you for joining us. And we can get right into it.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I've been wanting to hop on since I saw the interview with Charlie. And ever since that, I was like, yo, this seems dope. I gotta spend some time.
Yeah, you gotta hop on the flywheel and we gotta keep it spinning.
Yes, sir.
And so like for the people who may not know who you are and what you're up to, can you give a little bit of an introduction about yourself and how you became so interested in liquid staking tokens in particular?
Yeah, so I mean, we can do the long story, we can do the short story of just like how I got into things, or how I got into Ion in particular. But I'll kind of do the mid story. I'll make the long part short,
the mid-story,
and then I'll make the long part short, and then the short part go a little bit more in depth. So in terms of kind of in terms of how I got into kind of like the whole crypto space in general. I learned about crypto at a very young age. Back in 2015, I was like 12, 13 at the time. And then kind of follow along the ecosystem, and I got really serious into it, like in the 17, 18 era, like for the DeFi, on kind of like the whole growth of specifically like actually lending markets, which kind of comes full circle. Like my first foray into like even like finance into a close in like close proximity was learning about like AI ways of like analyzing credit risk without dependency on like FICO scores, and then writing white papers about like peer-to-peer lending protocols and potential like protocol design for them. And so that was kind of like the genesis of like me wanting to get into the crypto space and learning about DeFi and kind of the rest. And kind of from that, done a whole bunch of spattering various different things. Spent time as an engineer, did like product BD work, worked as a VC for a short amount of time, and really the inflection point for when I really like thought about and started thinking about like Ion as it exists now was during kind of like my last role when I was working and doing DeFi focused research at Blockchain Capital. I was there when we led the EigenLayer A round, and seeing EigenLayer kind of like close up, because at that point, the white paper wasn't public. Shriram had talked at like 4 or 5 events like throughout the past year before that about EigenLayer. So not really that many people had a concrete understanding of the protocol and kind of the implications it would have on the ecosystem. But really like our time kind of doing diligence on the EigenLayer deal and kind of understanding not only the value proposition of EigenLayer, but kind of the machinations of like how it would work and the implications that would have on kind of the staking space and the liquid staking space as a proxy, made me realize that there is a lot more that needs to be built in order to support this future where restaking is a future where this like active financialization of staked assets, is going to be the future. And so at the turn of the year, started kind of shaping out the beginning of what would now become Ion.
Oh, that's really cool. So you saw what was cooking at EigenLayer while you were at Blockchain Capital, and you realized, hey, there needs be a lot more infrastructure that needs to be built to support restaking and whatnot, and like different types of fun things you can do with liquid staking tokens.
100%.
Yeah. There's so many different directions we can go, but we can go into Ion, and then we can go how Ion fits into EigenLayer. So for like those who are unfamiliar, what is Ion Protocol? How does it work? And how does it unlock capital efficiency for LSTs?
Yeah, 100%. So Ion effectively, I like to split it up into two things. There's the primitive side of it, and then there's the product. And the primitive is really what enables a product to be really exciting and really be performant. So the primitive of like what the fundamental tech that Ion is based on, in one sentence, it's Ion as a fundamental piece of tech is focused on building a scalable platform to underwrite validator-backed assets without dependency on traditional like underwriting models, right? So what does that actually mean? I think like the first thing to ask is, okay, what does it mean like credit risk in DeFi, and why would you even like look into analyzing credit risk for validator-backed assets independently? So traditionally in DeFi, right, we are mostly familiar with lending protocols and the common architecture around lending, like makers, obvious compounds. And all of those kind of products are all the collateral types and how we determine things like LTV and interest rate curves and the kink and utilization rates and optimal utilization, so on and so forth. It's all on the basis of the depth of secondary market liquidity and pricing and price stability, to be specific, right? And when you kind of look at validator-backed assets, whether they're LSTs or restaking positions, the idea of the redeemability of these assets and like the creditworthiness is a lot less a function of the depth of the secondary market liquidity post withdrawals. And it's more about like, can I redeem the constituent value of this asset into the beacon chain for what it's worth in a validator somewhere, right? But not a lot of protocols currently really focus on being able to identify that redeemability and being able to understand the implications of that redeemability when you add on additional slashing parameters like protocols such as that. And so what we wanted to do was essentially build like a trustless data pipeline end to end, where we are able to read validator specific information, things like data directly from the consensus layer, as well as things about validator hardware setups, like whether or not we're using a trusted execution environment or TEE, whether or not you're involved in a DVT cluster, whether or not you're using a certain client or running certain relayers that you accept all your blocks from. And taking all this information in a trustless manner, so we use ZK state proofs as well as we're going to be using other kind of cryptographic primitives to trustlessly import the data on chain. And we plug it into a ZKML or a zero knowledge machine learning framework where we actually analyze and effectively formulate credit risk profiles for different validators and groups of validators. And what we do with this information is we then take this information and say, okay, we have all this credit risk analysis. What do we actually do with it, right? And that's where the product side of Ion comes in. And the product side of Ion is we build financial primitives that are on the basis of this credit risk analysis. So what a kind of beachhead first product is that's coming out soon is going to be a lending market where all of this traditional parameterization is instead of being price oriented is actually replaced with this validator based credit risk analysis. And so things like interest rates, things like utilization, optimal utilization rates, things like your interest rate curves, things like your LTVs are all going to be determined on the basis of this analysis. And what this does for users is allow us to more capitally efficient underwrite those positions with ideally more minimal liquidation risk and being able to support a larger swath of assets, which ideally can be scalable to support restaking platforms and restaking positions, which most likely will not have robust counterparty liquidity for a long time, especially with the kind of large amounts of permutations of various different slashing parameters that can be implemented into these restaking platforms as well.
Yeah, I have a few questions from that whole explanation. So like what exact methodology do you use for determining credit worthiness? You mentioned like ZK proofs of the beacon chain. You mentioned you were like looking to other cryptographic solutions. Like how do you like decide like which weights to use for what? And then the second question I had is, you're coming out the lending market, but like what other things can be built with like Ion Stack?
Yeah, 100%. Both two very good questions. We definitely wouldn't be starting this if it was only just a lending market that we did.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the actual kind of risk analysis, so I'll start with that. Yes, that first. The most important thing that you want to effectively track or predict is the propensity of validators to get slashed and the corresponding economic impact of the slashing on the what we call like the entity in which those validators are part of. So when you think about like what does that entity mean? It's more about like where you actually socialize risk and socialize losses to the user. So for traditional like providers, right? The entity is the provider itself, because if you hold, say for example, like Lido's STETH, if a slash event were to occur, that event would be socialized to all holders of that asset. So we focus on isolating validators to these entity based kind of groups. And from these entity-based groups, we use all of the kind of like disparate data points. So there's kind of two sections of different data points that we aggregate. So one is consensus layer information. So this is information that's directly from the Ethereum consensus layer, where we pull things like attestation history, pull things like inclusion delay over time. We pull things like how many, what's your like average reward? What's like the penalties that you've ever incurred in the past? We aggregate all that information for all the validators in a given entity. And then we also take in information about validator setups. And so this is more about things that an operator can choose to do with a validator. What client are you running, right? What's your execution client? What's your consensus client? What kind of, are you running a DVT setup? Which provider are you using? Who are you splitting your keys to? Are you running in a trusted execution environment? Which trusted execution environment? What is the software trusted execution environment, right? Not all these inputs are input into the law currently, but will be over time. And from all of these inputs, we effectively kind of do an analysis where we compare the kind of historical performance of all these validators against each other, and look for trends in which we have validators with optimal kind of positioning of their setups, being the ones that are deemed kind of like as a benchmark for being more creditworthy over time. And we generally use these optimal setups as a North Star to compare against other validators and to effectively try to predict the propensity of the rest of the validators with kind of the diverse setup of validators, because a lot of entities or providers run multiple operators, especially permissionless ones. We will have thousands or potentially even tens of thousands of operators. Effectively, we analyze all the disparate kind of different setups that people have and then create a composite score that's kind of an aggregation of the probabilistic nature of any one of those validators get slashed in that entire entity. And then that's where we map it to the lending platform. Any questions about that? I can move over to like some of the other products that we're thinking about as well.
That was pretty thorough, to be honest. Did you have a question, Kent? Yeah,
I definitely got cues. I definitely got some cues. So first of all, no, this is super interesting. But the moment you start listing out all of these parameters to me, I'm like, well, are all these parameters easily verifiable? And could you have access? That's
a good question.
To this?
That's the right question. So that's a great question. Are all these variables or all these parameters easily verifiable? The answer is a resounding absolutely not. Absolutely not. That is our job, effectively. That's why I kind of separate Ion into a primitive and a product, because there is so much infrastructure that needs to be built
that's
to
like the first
verify verify these setups. So what can we verify? So for us, like even right now, we have an internally working proof of concept for verifying validator balances and validator history, utilizing ZK state proofs of consensus layer information. So So those things, any consensus layer derived data, most of it is pretty easy to verify on an irregular basis. Now, doing it on a slot by slot basis and aggregating that many proofs gets really expensive really quickly. Doing it for 700,000 validators once a while, whether that's a day or a week, is relatively manageable pricing wise and speed wise. So a lot of consensus layer information is pretty easily verifiable. After EIP 4788 as well, where we're able to effectively create a beacon block root in the EVM, it'll allow pretty much anyone to cross-reference and verify information pretty simply.
That's big, right? 4788.
Yes.
Because right now you can't.
Because you can't right now, right?
There's no such thing as these decentralized validator. There's always some oracle.
Yeah, exactly. Well, technically, like if you ran a full node and got the state or got the like Merkle root from our proof, then you could cross-reference it if you're running a full node. Most people aren't running full nodes, so yeah. But in theory, you could verify now. It's just like the barrier to entry is a lot higher.
Yeah.
But consensus layer information, theoretically, by the end of the year, right? It should be pretty simple for most people if they wanted to cross-verify it, do it. And then most of the cryptographic primitives are built / we're implementing for querying beacon chain state. So that's kind of like not necessarily a perfectly solved problem, but we're mostly there. The one that's a lot more interesting is when you get to these other like things about like validator setups. So one great example, I want to shout out the people at Puffer Finance.
Puffer, shout out Puffer.
Yeah, we love the Puffer people, and they're working on this as well. Is finding ways to verify. They have this thing called RAVE. I can look up in the docs, called Remote Attestation Verification. I forgot what the E stands for, but effectively what you can do is they have a setup where you can actually remotely attest on chain to the fact that you're using their trusted setups. And they're actually going to be open sourcing this as something that the entire ecosystem can use. And this is essentially not necessarily fully solves the problem for just execution environments because there's a lot of different types you can use. But this kind of open source software is a great starting point for building like trustless ways to verify these types of validator setup informations. I know the Obel team is working on like PVSS, where they have like a publicly verifiable secret sharing scheme for their validators and DBT setups. And then, we're also working and chatting with a lot of these teams to kind of collaborate to make sure that once we do build these primitives out and we prioritize building these primitives out, that they can actually be put to use in a legitimate product that provides real value to users.
So it's called RAVE, what they're looking for at Puffer. That seems incredibly memeable.
I know, right?
Yeah. Well, they like
their naming.
Yeah, it actually stands for realizing alternative visions for Ethereum. That's what it stands for.
Yeah. Like everyone will be running SGX.
Yeah, everybody. You should let them know that's what it should stand for. Well, yeah.
Yes.
But anyways.
Got
so,
it. And
wait, did you have another question? Yeah.
Well, let me just try to summarize it. So effectively, all of these parameters would sooner or later be verifiable across all these different providers that you had just mentioned. And my follow-up to that would be, which of the parameters would you say are like the one that received the heaviest weighting? Because the way I'm thinking about this is like almost in like a credit score type.
Yeah.
Right.
Good question.
If I don't pay my credit card bill and I get flagged with a late payment or a no payment, that's probably the worst one. And then the probably not so bad one would be if I had a recent credit check on my credit report, right? So there's kind of a scale to like the weighting here. Is that kind of a right way to think about it? Or is every parameter important in the setup?
Yeah, no, that's a really important thing to think about when it comes to how we're thinking about like credit risk analysis, right? And so I can kind of tie into what I think is actually the strongest kind of tech that you can use to actually abstract away this risk. And really the question you should then ask is, where does risk sit? As we know, slashings are pretty rare events in validators on Ethereum. We can't really say about, restaking platforms because we don't know yet. There's no precedent. But with validators, historically, the biggest indicator of a slashing event is poor operator setups and operator error. And so the question then is, well, how do you reduce that? And what are the things that are best at reducing that operator error? Two things. And they're the things that you hear about a lot, or I feel like one of them you hear about a lot, the other less so. One of them is the use of trusted execution environments. So why? Effectively, if you use trusted execution environments to remotely attest to blocks and to store your signer keys, you actually abstract away ownership of your effectively like private key pair for the validator to that trust execution environment. So you can actually create a world where every operator validator actually never gains access to the plaintext keys of that validator hardware, meaning you greatly reduce the chance of operator error ever affecting that validator. So that's one, the use of trusted execution environments. The second, I think, is the one that everyone talks about, which is the use of DVT, right? Because with DVT, although it's not perfectly civil resistant, right? For verified operators who can, attest to the fact that, they're the ones who are running certain setups. If you have multiple operators managing, a single validator, and then you require a threshold of them to enact any changes, well, the kind of screw ups of a single operator in that system is less likely to affect that, cluster. Now, you can run into problems where you have, if everyone's running the same client or and you have like buggy client upgrades and things of that nature, you can still have some kind of exogenous risk that is imposed in DVT clusters, but, you do greatly reduce the risk of operator error ever affecting your validator as a result. So those two things, like once we get more prolific adoption of both DVT and the use of TDs for validator and just generally like any, AVS or middleware operators, I think will greatly reduce the chances of slashing even more than they are today.
Got it. So let me just summarize, and then Dave, you could take the next question. So the two main things are TEVs and DBS. What
was TEs, trusted execution environments. Right? So it's like a
T, like Arizona iced tea.
Right. Trusted execution
is like a golf tee.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. So and then the second point, what were the letters? They are acronym, and what do they stand for?
DVT, distributed validator technology. Effectively, it's using DKG or distributed key generation to split validator keys between multiple holders.
Got it. Okay. Those two are the most important. Got it. I just need to do that so that we can have a sound bite so that we can then use it later. But perfect. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Dave, go ahead.
Okay. So we got into the methodology. And now we're going to go dive deep into the technicals of Ion. How much infrastructure underlies Ion currently, and what is the purpose of the infra that exists now?
Yeah. So what is the whole infra stack? So we run a couple things, right? And hopefully this will become even more in the future. We have like state proof setups where we essentially run our like zero knowledge state proofs to read Ethereum consensus state. And what happens is when we initiate, and then here's a little fun fact, I don't think we said this publicly yet, but when we initiate liquidations, it's off the basis of the amount of liquidity in a validator on the consensus layer. It actually has nothing to do with the liquidity on the execution layer or like in an AMM or anything. So that means zero exposure to price manipulation in secondary markets causing liquidations.
Whoa.
And so that's one really crucial part of the stack.
Can you repeat that? So like
and could you unpack it as well?
So unpack it. Yeah. Let's
100%. So, we really truly believe that the core value of any validator-backed asset, so asset of LSTs, restaking positions, whatever, of which you can take from a validator and put it on chain, it's the value, it's the ability for you to actually redeem that value from a validator in the consensus layer somewhere. And so what we use is zero knowledge state proofs to verify the balance of the validators of your asset. And we only liquidate your position if that balance shifts below, the ideal LTV of that market. And so you never get exposure to price-based liquidations on the execution layer. So it doesn't matter the amount of counterparty liquidity in the AMM that your provider is supporting. They don't need to incentivize any liquidity. As long as they have withdrawals enabled, we have a public registry of their withdrawals, of like the withdrawal key and where their validators sit on chain somewhere. We can effectively verify that your balance, although it might take a little bit of time, withdrawal queue is there to be redeemed. And so you get to rest safe and understand that as long as your validator set isn't slashed, your loan is safe.
Talk about capital efficiency right there.
That's capital efficiency.
There's capital efficiency right there.
Exactly. Minimizing liquidation risk just as much as possible, right?
Yeah.
So that's one part of the stack that's really important. The other part of the stack that is really important is the fact that we use zero-knowledge machine learning. So we have a circuit that effectively, a zero-knowledge circuit that effectively enshrines our compute system, where we're analyzing all these different pieces of validator tech. And we're creating like these credit risk profiles, which you don't have to unpack these risk profiles and like make a decision yourself. We just say, okay, we have these credit risk profiles. What's going to showcase to you is an LTV on your asset. It's going to be that interest rate curve on that market, right? And it's going to be isolated to those assets and to those positions in a way that's like a lot more readable to you as a person. And then the third thing and the final thing is the way that we trustlessly verify all these data sources. So that's a mix of, custom circuits for custom signature schemes and like TEs to like state proofs for consensus layer data to so on and so forth. But those are really the three crucial parts of infrastructure that we're building that enable Ion to work the way it does. I'd say the one more thing, I'd make it 3.5, is we run a lot of backend infrastructure that verifies all this in a more trusted way that we can track internally. It's just so we have like backups just in case any of these proofs end up being faulty, or you get certain exploits or like concerns on consensus layer data or like bugginess and like clients or if we're pulling data from certain places, just in case, so that way we can always make sure that we're posting the right data that's not going to affect your position.
Decentralization is a journey, not a sprint.
That is true. The idea, hopefully the end state is, we plan on open sourcing most of this tech. So it'd be really great if other people could run the same systems that we do, and then we just like cross-reference and medianize the data, all of which is trustless. So that way you don't even have trusted oracles. You just have people running these trustless setups that we can verify, just like, Ethereum's run on this entire set of like trustless validators. Right?
And that leads to my next question so well. How do we think about the role of trustless infrastructure when it comes to building in DeFi and LSTFi in particular?
Yeah, 100%. I think so. That's something we think about a lot at Ion because, and just in general, when I thought about building in DeFi, like one of my biggest things that I thought was really important was making sure that you can build governance minimized systems, meaning where governance doesn't have to control every single small bit and piece of the protocol. But only is used for like the big decisions that really matter. While at the same time, not having to sacrifice complexity and sacrifice the ability to build these, really novel primitives that introduce these really kind of complex and interesting ideas. And so I think like by building with trustless infrastructure is the only way that we can really take on some of the complexity that, exists in TradFi and like the best practices of that, things like hardware-based credit risk analysis, which is super interesting. And bring that into DeFi without having to trust like a centralized party to effectively do that risk analysis all the time. Because eventually the end state is we'll open source that model, right? We'll allow other people in a cattle competition-esque way to open source and contribute to that model. And because all of the data is derived from like trustless endpoints, you can effectively backtest an optimization to the model. You could show on chain that it performs better than the previous model, and then it could just be voted or automatically added in as the new system that the protocol operates on. And so you can see this end state where we can actually build these really complex and primitives and really complex pieces of protocols that can effectively be updated without any trust assumptions, and without having dependency on like decentralized entities to do like minutia tinkering as an end state.
So, Kit, do you have any questions?
I'm good.
Did he freeze up? Okay.
I think he's frozen.
Oh, no, he's there. So this leads actually well to my next question. I feel like this is flowing very well. Ken, so I feel like, do you feel like a larger protocol could fork you guys? And like, how do you incentivize like different protocols and different teams to like be more positive sum and build within Ion instead of forking it, you know? Because can't like somebody like, what if like Aave just decides like, hey, we're gonna have you know, a new type of lending market that, you know, underwrites validators and stuff. Is that like possible to happen? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I definitely think like with enough resources, anything is forkable, right?
Yeah.
I can't say that like any protocol can never fork any other protocol. Like realistically, if Aave wanted to fork Euler, they could, right?
Yeah.
They have the resources to do it. Even though they I think Euler has like an open source license that's not commercially or allows commercial forks, but you know, if you have enough manpower, you can figure it out.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think, yes, right, any protocol can fork any other one. But the thing that makes me kind of feel secure in what we're doing is, one, we're focusing on tackling an asset class as an entity, like restaking positions. I think, you know, no one else is really, it doesn't really make sense for a protocol that is really well established to kind of extend themselves to take such a huge R&D load, because there's a lot of R&D. Like we mostly do R&D than anything else. It's all like, okay, how can we take traditional credit risk models and like banks and like apply it here and stuff like that, or how do we prove the use of a certain relay or things like that, right? So it's like a lot of R&D questions, a lot of R&D overhead to build out these systems. And it's like, yes, you could go through that process yourself, but if I am operating a successful multi-billion-dollar protocol that will capture so much more liquidity as the market develops, and I have ways to kind of further my network effects that already exist, why would I put in and dedicate so much labor and so much time and effort into a market that isn't even tested yet, right? Yeah. And we're making that bet, obviously, because, you know, I have conviction in the EigenLayer team and this idea of restaking as something that will have value to the ecosystem. But for somebody who's building and running a more established protocol, there's a lot of mouths to feed, and the kind of downside of making such a big bet is a lot more pronounced than it is for us. So I just think the economics and kind of the downside from an operator perspective doesn't really make sense. Now, how do we incentivize people to kind of work with us instead of like, let's say, other upcoming teams kind of forking what we do? I think for us, like, we're taking on like one of the most hardest and like high hanging fruit of what could be done in the restaking space. I think a great example of that is the growth of or the announcement of protocols like what Stater is doing with restaking, like liquid restaking tokens, and FrxETH, right? They're doing like liquid restaking tokens.
Liquid restaking tokens.
Yeah, exactly. And that.
Whoa.
That's
the thing.
Yeah, so it's something that just cropped up, which I think is a lot lower hanging fruit, which is ask the question like, okay, we have liquid staking providers for, you know, regular Ethereum validators. Do we have liquid staking providers for restaking operators? Well, we don't. So someone needs to build that infrastructure. We kind of saw that coming. We're like, okay, like, we definitely think there's value in that, but we know that there are going to be a lot of teams who are better positioned to really spend to like kind of pivot their infrastructure to build that. We wanted to tackle like what we think is one of the harder problems, that if we truly believe there's an end state for this tech and this market, that this will be necessary. And again, it's all about kind of taking that outsized risk and telling the people who want to take the lower risk, like, hey, like, we have done the R&D, we have done the research, we have taken the effort to think about these problems. We'd love to like help you kind of get off the ground with what you guys are working on. So that way we can go and support you with this kind of end state product that we're attempting to build. And so it's actually really kind of valuable for a lot of these providers, even like the folks building liquid staking providers. Like we love chatting with the Stater team to be able to go to them and say like, hey, like you guys are building out this new tech. We'd love to support it, and love to enable you to actually gain some market share by being able to support like capital efficiency and like the basic DeFi lending that goes for this type of asset. So that we just really think like there's a lot of synergies with what we're doing. Just as like I could say there's a lot of synergies with just like building a money market in the first place back in 2017. Right.
And speaking of, that's right. And speaking of synergies and building a lending market for validators, I can't help but to think of Frax and FrxETH V2, which is literally a lending market for is described as a lending market for validators, Aave for validators. So, how do you envision yourselves, integrating the Frax ecosystem potentially? What would be your pitch to the Frax core team to, integrate Ion? Maybe you guys launch on Frax Chain, who knows? But like, what would be your pitch to the Frax guys?
Yeah. So for us in the Frax guys, I think the Frax guys are actually working on a level below what we're working on from an infrastructure standpoint, right? Because like at the end of the day, although we do a lot of this like consensus layer, data reading and analysis and so on and so forth, at the end of the day, the product that people are interacting with is on the application layer. It is strictly like a DeFi product. Whereas FrxETH V2 actually is more similar to a liquid staking protocol in the sense that although you yourself don't have to be running the node operator or node operator hardware, nor do you directly have to go to Frax as an entity. But it's very similar to like the systems of like Stakewise V3, where it's like it allows a lot more freedom for people who want to opt into certain operators to be able to dictate like their rates and how much they want to earn, revenue shares. So that way we're not all monopolized with the Lido 10% rate, and that's kind of end of day and whatever. Wherever they can get support for ST, that's kind of it. Like if you want to build your own custom strategies, if you want to build your own custom rates and kind of share differences, and you want to optimize for certain hardware subs or whatever, like you can do that on FrxETH V2. Now, the implication with FrxETH V2 is now FrxETH is like a composite representation, or like people's positions are a composite representation of either all the validators or like that specific validator they're exposed to. And what that introduces is a lot more complexity and being able to understand and actually integrate that product into a lot of the pre-existing DeFi products who are focused on the traditional method of risk-based underwriting. And so what we actually optimize for is, I think we're really in a really great position to go to Frax and say like, hey, if an individual validator in your system wants to be able to take out a loan against their position and doesn't want to, like socialize their yields through FrxETH, as a collective token, or like even the socialized position, you have a whole bunch of different validators and you want to gain access to like large scale like counterparty liquidity without you having to shell out token incentives for it, or as much token incentives for it. Well, this is a perfect platform to enable your users to be able to gain access to that counterparty liquidity with effectively minimal overhead on your side. And so that's kind of the thing we really hope to kind of enable for these more kind of like modular and kind of more complex provider tech that's being built out.
Yeah, like how I envision it is, right now, like we'll propose with FrxETH V2 is you have like the validators, they put up collateral, there's an interest rate, it's variable, but it's economic in nature. But like with you guys, basically the underwriting can be like based on the infrastructure itself of the validator providers. So I feel like that just unlocks way more capital efficiency, and potentially allows like for even like lower collateral thresholds. So instead of being 4 ETH, maybe it could be like 2 ETH. It's like a really good validator that has a history, that's been verified and everything like that.
100% potentially.
Yeah. And my next question
got me thinking.
I have. Oh wait, Kid. Yeah, go ahead, Kid.
Yeah. A quick question about like. So this got me thinking. When FrxETH V2 was first announced, it was the place for the highest performing validators to go to, and the users would benefit from that and get like the best APR. And the thinking then was like, well, APR would be the only benchmark for us to consider
when choosing, a validator effectively. But now with your data layer, there's so many more things to account on, because this person could be earning the best APR right now, but underneath is like their setup is like plugged into so many different things and so many different risk parameters that nobody knows about, but they have the highest APR, so everyone's just attracted to that, and that could lead to really, really big problems down the line. But with your data layer, everyone would kind of get to see that. So I was thinking, like, is there a different question, but you had mentioned just a couple seconds ago about how you could borrow against the validator could borrow against their validator holdings. How would that affect the user who received those liquid staking tokens? Like the FrxETH validator is different from the FrxETH holder, right?
Yeah. So for the person, it would be the person who holds the asset that could effectively borrow against it. Or what you could do is you could allow, or what you do is if you built in the layer between, you could allow users like to borrow against their bond, right? Because if you have to put up a bond, let's say your bond is let's say 4 ETH, Dave, but we say we think 4 ETH is a bit too steep based on your credit risk profile. We'll actually underwrite one of that. So you can actually take out a 1 ETH loan against this 4 ETH bond that you put up. So, there's potential for a lot of variability like that to exist. Another thing that I'd like to point out in kind of this kind of paradigm is, we talk a lot about these building trustless infrastructure, and it's really important and all that stuff. But the kind of colloquial thing that we all know but don't really say is that, no one is going to pay for it realistically. Like if I have to pay more money for this trustless infrastructure, or if I'm taking a hit on my APR because I'm running this trustless infrastructure, at the end of the day, that's not every node operator that I've chatted with, at least most of them are realistically, I'm in it. This is business. I have to be in it for the capital. And what I love about what I love about this design is that you can actually align both those things, because what does more trustless infrastructure enable for you? Well, enables a better credit risk profile. And what does a better credit risk profile enable for you? More capital efficiency. So now it's economically feasible and you're economically aligned to use and build this better infrastructure, because it will actually enable you, your customers, and your users to actually gain access to better economic outcomes as a result. And that's the thing that we really wanted to propagate, especially with restaking alignment and this idea of building restaking positions that are not chasing high APRs, because APR is just a small percentage, right? What is more important than the small percentage you earn is the amount of leverage and the amount of capital efficiency you can open up against those positions, because that is literally potentially orders of magnitude more value in a shorter time frame. And being able to do that and being able to open that door to people who really take the effort to build this trustless infrastructure, it's going to be a huge kind of unlocking of economic value for those who actually take the effort to really focus on building these robust and secure systems.
Let's go on that idea that leverage and capital efficiency is more important than APR. What do you mean by that? Can you explain that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, 100%. So it's the idea that if we're assuming, of course, conservative amounts of APR, we're talking sub triple digits. The ability to gain access to capital in the short term because of the future discount capital, right, is a lot more valuable than effectively earning a fixed or even variable rate within a tight band in the long run, right? A 2% optimization on my APR for staking is worth a lot less than me being able to open up a 10x position versus a 5x position, because of the LTV that I can enable against my asset because of how secure my validator is, right? Because what is that, that step between 5 to 10x and my position allows me to go use that capital to effectively compound my yield, or go to another outlet and say okay, I want to hedge against this position. Oh, I want dollar denominated exposure, right? I can, being able to do that is a lot more valuable than simply saying, okay, I can optimize my position by, or my yield rate by another 50 basis points, right? If I go, especially when it comes to institutional investors, if I go to an institutional investor and say, you're worried about staking because of the credit risk and the smart contract risk. Okay, how about I say you can open a 95% LTV position against your staking position to effectively insure yourself and hedge your position for up to 95% of the value, because we know that people who run these operators and these validator systems, and we trust them, right? Based on our analysis. Like, that is a huge kind of transformation, especially for that type and that demographic of power user who really cares about these large quantities of capital that they're investing in these infrastructure systems.
The power of compound interest, everyone.
Yeah, I think on the validator side, though, that brings up a very interesting point. It's like, yes, it's going to be more expensive for you to run these kind of setups, but the moment you get your validator score, I'm not sure what you guys are gonna call it, but like increases, then you effectively could use less of your own ETH and run more nodes, right? Like it's like an investment upfront to get that setup, the whole Trustless setup going, and afterwards you could run X many more nodes because you have a more trusted system. It's like once you show the V card, the validator score, and is solid, people are just, okay, yes, I'm willing to lend it to you. You know, like I think it's like, because then now you just unlock that layer. Like, some people may just want to lend you that 28 ETH, but some other people may want to lend you the 4 ETH that is needed for you to borrow in the first place. You know, those guys can then share in even higher yields. So that's the way I think about it. It's like the validator can get leverage on their 4 ETH, and that's the reason why they should do it.
Yeah. And imagine if I'm like, I'm going to lend you that 4 or that like 3 ETH or against your like 4 ETH bond. And then you're running a system where you can't even access the validator keys and slash yourself if you wanted to. So it's like, from a user, I'm like, okay, I feel really secure in this. And as a lender, right, for the people who are lending money to these markets, you can be assured that this person is running a better, more secure system. That's probably even more secure than the system that they were running before and with a larger bond, right? Because there's nothing more secure than economic value than actually just building setups in which you can't screw up the system.
Right.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about is, we're talking about ION and the ins and outs of it. What are the security risks and economic risks to ION, and how do you mitigate them?
Yeah, so I'd say that's a very good question. So
gotta ask it.
Yeah, you gotta ask that question. Yeah. So there's this whole host of risks that exist within restaking platforms that we think about every day, because our entire business model is on the basis of us effectively being able to underwrite that. And if we don't, or if we think there are fundamental flaws in the way restaking platforms are built, then that means, that spells doom for the protocol. So that's something we think about every day. I could kind of go a little bit more into that, but that's a bit longer form. I think like shorter form, when we think about kind of security within our own systems, I think there's really two things, right? Obviously, your first is just general smart contract security, and there's kind of like two idioms I stay by. One, shout out to Professor Riyad Wabi for stating this on one of our AMAs. That's the Cubist team. Great, they built TE infrastructure, love those guys. Where he said less code is better code.
That's the Web3 mantra. It's the crypto mantra.
Yeah, that's the mantra. So we definitely try to build our systems as lean as possible, especially on the smart contract layer. And then the second one that we really try to live by, and I mentioned a little bit before, is that when it comes to this data provisioning, there's no such thing as too much redundancy, right? Running our own backups is not something we have to do, but we do it anyway because we know that, if our circuit architecture or the libraries we're using, or, any of the folks that we're working with to build these circuits ends up screwing up, we need to be able to have backups to make sure that we know the true value of what's going on. And then eventually, and the reason why we're open sourcing this tech in the long run is to be able to, have others act as that point of redundancy as well. And I think, minimizing bloat and optimizing for redundancy when it comes to data feeds, like those are the two things that are kind of our North Star when it comes to security internally. Now, if you want to talk about restaking platforms and all the exogenous concerns there, we can.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother thing.
Let's get. We're about to, shift gears here and go into that. Because obviously you're close with EigenLayer. It's like EigenLayer is really part of the genesis of Ion Protocol, its origin. So, can you go into a few questions here? How are you guys working with them? What is the mutual beneficial relationship between you two? And are there any existential risks surrounding EigenLayer that you're considering in your architecture, the things that you think about every day?
Yeah. So how are we working with them? That's kind of first one. So there's some things that works that are a little bit lower key. They might be up on the Toast episode. We'll see. But
any hints? Just a little sprinkle of alpha.
A little sprinkle of things that might happen. Maybe, so let's say, maybe there's a need for certain standards for how we represent positions in the ecosystem and how people can use them. Yeah. And it's important to think about, how we build those standards, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
So that's one thing. But like generally, for us and the way we kind of build the protocol, we don't really have too many dependencies on them to build like hard integrations. They don't have dependencies on us to build hard integrations. We're in contact with the team and we chat with them on a frequent basis. I spent a lot of time with the folks back in SF at SPC, talking about everything from risk to like the role of DeFi and EigenLayer and so on and so forth. So we really keep those open channels as much as possible and try and focus on talking about the things that matter most to kind of the growth of the restaking ecosystem holistically. One thing I will say is I'm currently working on, and some of this might be out by the time of this recording, but working on some kind of open source platforms that will integrate some folks from the EigenLayer team that will be kind of an open source, like collaborative vocal platform for people to talk about restaking. And a lot of people who are working on things in restaking across the ecosystem. It will include a podcast too. I just like this. So some fun stuff like that will be down the line where you can hear us talk about what other builders are building in the restaking ecosystem, not just ABSs, but things on top of it. What are some of the risks, open research questions, things that the EF is thinking about, like a whole bunch of various different topics that I think would be really interesting to bring to light. In terms of like the mutual, like beneficial relationship, I think the IBR team really recognizes this as well, is like, at the end of the day, in order to be able to create adoption for a new kind of security primitive, there needs to be a way to financialize it to some extent, because inherently you can't repeat proof of stake without repeating the history of how stake was financialized with staking derivatives or tokens and so on and so forth. So the benefit is, we're able to be that outlet to do all this risk analysis and kind of handle all the overhead of managing that and building these financial primitives. And they're able to go to their users and say like, hey, instead of the choice being you deposit your ETH in EigenLayer or you deposit in a lending market or an AMM or so on and so forth, right? Well, now you can do both.
Why not both?
And so you eliminate that kind of decision matrix and that opportunity cost for the user and say, it's not or, it's now and. And you kind of open the door to building a whole new sector of DeFi as well, built on these assets, which I think is really exciting. I think the last thing you asked was about, was it about the risks of...
Yeah, existential risks surrounding EigenLayer restaking and how you consider that in building your own architecture.
Yeah, so the one thing about restaking platforms, and this includes EigenLayer and others I know are building some things, is that everyone's really big on permissionless inclusion of every part of the stack, meaning any type of restaker can join with the assets that are supported. Any type of operator can join the system. Any type of ABS can join the system.
Yes, you can
inclusion.
Come in.
Which is great. The one kind of concern with that is you get the proliferation of a huge principal agent problem, because you're effectively any operator who's accepting user deposits, or any restaker who is giving user deposits to an operator is effectively giving them an unsecured. And so what you're doing is you're giving this capital to an operator, which doesn't require them to have any skin in the game, and saying, I really hope you don't slash me, please don't, right? And you can imagine there might be ABSs and there might be certain designs of systems that's where, being slashed or maybe not even being up to spec as much as you would want to be, or an operator should be, and could be really detrimental to restakers, is something that operators maybe don't care about as much because, they're not required to put up capital of their own in these systems. Now, ABSs create a standard that most operators should put up capital of their own, but, it's a permissionless system. You can't enforce it, right? And so some of the things that we think about are like how these open design decisions around like permissionlessness and like being able to have anyone run operators, run ABSs, it introduces a lot of edge case scenarios where you could have people, be slashed, or you could have fault or malicious ABSs or malicious operators. It makes it really difficult to believe in the future where, anonymous operators can never be a thing, because if you're an anonymous operator holding an unsecured loan, there's always the potential that
just like run away with it.
Yeah, not necessarily run away with it, because the contract architecture doesn't allow you to do so. But if there are secondary markets for bribing certain operators to do certain things, and then if you build financial markets on top of things like, just imagine an options protocol that enables speculation on restaking rates, and someone puts in a large put on rates and says, well, to an operator, well, if you go and slash that position, I'll share half the profit. This doesn't get tracked anywhere, right? And the operator's like, I'm an anonymous operator. I have no skin in the game. This is none of my capital. Well, if there's enough money in there, it might make sense for me to like pack my bags and I'm all good, even though, there was never, even though you'll lose out on the future value. Well, there's no way for people to really track you. And also there's so much capital in the system that effectively you could be, like not even punished and could subsist without needing to kind of do this again. So there are concerns with kind of trusted parties and how we think about trust in the system. And when I look at it from an underwriter and I see like, okay, I have these operators that I effectively have to trust to not purposely default on these loans. Well, that's something that's really difficult to do, right? So, we're thinking about ways of, standardizing certain hardware setups, requiring standard and accepting only certain standards for how people run operator setups and things of that nature. But yeah, it's something that, is not a solved question, and it's something we'll have to think about.
Yeah, it sounds like there must be a lot of things that keep you up at night.
Yes, constantly. I'm actually something I'm going to write soon is a potential design for restaking platforms, and EigenLayer in particular, that could minimize this risk, which I call containerization. So, but we'll see whether that comes to fruition.
You should definitely do it.
Yeah,
and
100%.
Yeah, would love to read that. And also, somebody else who has been thinking a lot about restaking risk is none other than Vitalik himself. Several months ago, he wrote a piece warning against unchecked restaking could pose a systematic risk to Ethereum. What are your thoughts on that? I remember particularly he used the example of the Brazilian presidential election, and it comes. I love Brazil, big fan. So I was happy he chose that. It's fun, but really funny coincidence. When I interviewed Guart when I was in Brazil, we actually did an interview with Guart.
Really?
We did an interview with Guart himself. Actually, like before we get into the Vitalik question, what are your thoughts on Guart? I think he's one of the funniest accounts, and like his commentary.
I think he's hilarious.
It's so
great. I feel like everyone in the restaking ecosystem kind of takes it a little bit too seriously.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I love the comedic spin. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, oh wow, like the Burning Man coincided with the restaking. Like, did they think about restake this and that? But shout out, Guart. We love you. Keep up what you're doing. But yeah, so back. So he was talking about the Brazilian presidential election. If like there's like it's a contentious election, and the chain splits, and like the real or what to like Brazil A, and Brazil B. And I thought it was like really interesting because we, like you said, we haven't had a mass slashing event on Ethereum, and I'm sure like we will. Like, I feel like it's definitely like in the future.
Might happen.
It may happen, may not happen. Like, I feel like, you know, considering like all the things that happened in the past in crypto, like I would, like, I can't imagine everything that can't be imagined just happens. So, what are your thoughts on, you know, Vitalik's article and like, and on all that?
Yeah, so I think he makes a good point about social consensus. I think, but the thing I think is really important to remember when it comes to kind of what he's talking about is that this dilemma doesn't purely exist only with the invention of restaking, right? Social pressures to fork the chain could occur for a variety of reasons. I think another good example is like if USDC decided, okay, like we don't like a certain upgrade, we're going with a certain canonical chain. I think that would put a lot of pressure. If, you know, there's a coalition of DeFi protocols where like, or let's say, you know, you had a problem where a lot of value was sitting in certain protocols and, you know, you had a problem with centralized price feeds and you create a centralization of capital with a few holders, you know, that you would have a lot of social pressure to revert the state. I think like the thing with EigenLayer, what EigenLayer does in particular is it creates a standardized methodology for building these incentives, right? These incentives kind of just came naturally as we just created dependencies. Yeah. But like what Vitalik is really talking about is kind of the combination of two different factors. Exogenous dependencies on that Ethereum depends on, and then those exogenous dependencies securing a lot of economic value. And I think like what EigenLayer does is you hear that and you're like, EigenLayer perfectly fits the bill, but a lot of things also fit that bill. EigenLayer is just a thing of restaking platforms in general, they just don't want to contribute to EigenLayer. Other iterations of pretty much any restaking protocol will probably do this or cause this effect, where it just standardizes a method for people for that phenomenon to occur, right? And I do think, yeah, we do need act checks on kind of how we think about constructing restaking platforms to be able to mitigate that risk. So, you know, EigenLayer currently in its iteration, or like current iteration, has the veto multisig, which I think is a good first start. I think building standards for multi-prover systems, being able to mitigate like automated slashing events, and then decreasing the dependence on like a, you know, manual multisig would be great if you just had like multi-prover verification systems, redundant, you know, data streams for slashable events that can be open sourced and that, you know, operators could run as part of their hardware, I think would be fantastic. There's a lot of kind of various different things you could do to mitigate that risk. But yeah, it's a valid one, but I think we should consider it in the common sense that like, this is not something that doesn't exist currently.
Yeah, it would exist with or without EigenLayer. EigenLayer just standardizes it, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah, it's also fascinating. I feel like, you know, restaking seems like the final economic frontier for Ethereum at the infrastructure level, and then like after that, you just get into like roll-ups and like sequencers and like that.
Just wait till PEPSI maybe exists.
With PEPSI?
PEPSI, protocol enforced proposer commitments. For those of you, should look up Barnaby's FAQ about it. It's great.
Wait, let's get into it. What's PEPSI?
Yeah, PEPSI, you know, those guys would probably explain a lot better than I can, but high level, PEPSI is just effectively a way for, you can think of it as like in protocol, like protocol enshrined methodologies of enforcing proposers to commit to certain actions. So effectively, you could tell a proposer like, you know, if you opt into this, you know, PEPSI scheme, like you're required to, you know, order blocks a certain way, and then you'll get slashed if you don't, right? So you can create effectively like, well, slashing isn't necessary, but that's a possible thing you could implement, right? So you could effectively build a pseudo like protocol enshrine EigenLayer. Could be possible. You could also protocol enshrine things like PBS, or like ePBS is technically actually a precursor to PEPSI, but they kind of go hand in hand. You could do things like DBT with it. Yeah, a lot of pretty interesting, you know, infrastructure primitives could be like protocol enshrined things at PEPSI. It's pretty interesting.
Well, we got to dive into that a bit more, Kit. That's the first time I heard of that one. Oh, did he freeze up again? I don't know.
I think he's frozen.
Okay, now here's another question that's on everyone's mind. It's been on the timeline. You hear people complain about it. You know what I'm going to ask. Lido. People are like, they're about to hit 33%. People are
about to do that for a while.
Yeah, it's in anticipation. I've had my dopamine really. So that's about to happen. Lido, about to hit 33%. But what are your thoughts on Lido's dominance in the LST space? Does it pose a threat to Ethereum neutrality? And do you think Lido's doing anything wrong? Or they're just as a protocol, they're just incentivized to get as many tokens as possible. So
So I do think, and I'm not sure if Sasha says this blatantly. I've never seen him say it blatantly, but he might have. I could have just missed it. But I very much do think that, and to a certain extent, every protocol founder definitely feels this, that, if it's definitely not their jurisdiction to completely control the second order effects of the protocol ecosystem, especially one of Lido's dominance. Now, certain founders, I'm sure, feel that to different extents, hence why some are self-limiting. But again, all those who are agreeing to self-limit definitely do not have this much market share.
That's what we always talk about.
They might say a different thing if placed in the same position.
Yeah.
Right?
Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Do I think that Lido poses an existential risk to Ethereum as it exists currently, or as it exists?
The neutrality,
currently, yes. And the reason why is, and it's a personal opinion, but I think, 30 node operators is not enough to run the amount of stake that they're operating. People say, every Lido node operator doesn't even control more than 1.5% of the stake on Ethereum. And I'm like, that is way more than 1% is an insane number, in my opinion. Right?
Yeah, that's nuts.
It's ridiculously large. Exposure to that much risk from an operator overhead standpoint is enormous. That's not something I think is ideal. Now, could Lido ever get to a point where their system is a bit more risk mitigated, and I think is more aligned with the centralization ethos of Ethereum? 100%. Would it require doing a lot of work along the lines of the infrastructure work that I've been talking about during this entire time? Yes. Would it require being able to push decentralized node operator inclusion as one of the largest priorities of Lido's infrastructure? Yes.
FrxETH too. FrxETH too.
Exactly, right? I think at an end state, if they were to build the most optimized provider from a decentralization standpoint, if they, I have certain gripes with the Rocket Pool architecture as well, but if it was a lot closer to Rocket Pool's architecture as it exists today, I'd feel a lot more comfortable about where Lido is currently. I do think the people who are stating that Lido is a system, a network of 30 completely independent node operators
independent,
have no aligned interests with each other to do anything of the sort with the amount of stake that they control in Ethereum, I think it's a bit of a hyperbole, and let's be honest about kind of centralization to that scale. But I do think that those who are saying that provider or validator capital can't be centralized into a single provider at all, period, I think is also just a misappropriation of how we think about Lido's architecture and provider architecture currently. I think as an end state, I think 100% you could see if there was a robust enough provider that built enough safeguards from a centralization standpoint, it'd be totally feasible for it to be centralized within a single provider.
What can we do to check Lido's dominance?
Well, the reason why Lido is dominant, and also the other thing that I'm not sure other people really realize, is two things. One, the base APR that Lido provides is highest because they have so much stake. One, and they have some of the most performant node operators. FrxETH does outcompete.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So that's one part of it, right? But the second part of it, which is, again, an economic reason, the second part of it is Lido essentially mostly has a monopoly on all of the DeFi primitives when it comes to integrations. And so as a user, you can't, it's really hard to go tell a user, just as it is really hard to go tell a node operator to like take a hit on running like more trustless infrastructure, like for example, just DP, right? It's really hard to go to a staker and say, well, I want you to forego half your yield or a quarter or even 10% of your yield to go to this other solution because decentralization. And it's like, that's not
enough of an argument. And this is what you were saying before about capital efficiency versus APR. Like you want to get the most out of the capital that you have. And the fact that and the fact that Lido is integrated in all these DeFi protocols allows, users and institutions to do that. Like a big thing that has been a topic in the Frax Telegram is like people ask like, oh, where's the Chainlink Oracle? Where's the Chainlink Oracle? And for some reason, there's not a Chainlink Oracle for FrxETH, even though it's in the top 5 of LST protocols. And the team has tried. They've kind of, I'm not sure what's going on in Chainlink land about it. The Frax team has built their own Oracle, their own FrxETH Oracle. It's integrated into Fraxland, and if protocols want to integrate the Oracle, they can. But everybody wants Chainlink, so it's just hasn't happened yet, and it's been a real point of aggravation for just the Frax protocol and community because it has prevented us from being integrated in all these different protocols, which is allows for Lido's dominance. So if people are actually serious about something that we can do to lessen their dominance, why don't we get FrxETH into Chainlink? That's just such a small thing, and once that happens, then boom.
But I think but I think the real question we should be asking is, why are we depending on Chainlink to make who can be the best liquid staking provider? Right? We should be building systems that anyone can integrate. Anyone should be able to, open source to use our trusted ZK state proof Oracle to effectively say well, I know the redemption value of any provider. So if you want to go use it, just take it from our repo. Just go apply it to your lending platform. Go apply it to your CDP issue. Go apply it to whatever.
And it's more capital efficient as well.
Exactly. And it's that also one of the other reasons why we built IAM was the fact that we saw that Lido had huge dominance, but their dominance was on the basis that anyone else who isn't using STETH is taking an economic impact or an economic hit from it. It's Lido will not be the most secure and capital efficient asset or STETH won't be the most capital efficient asset in our market for a variety of reasons that is all directly tied to credit risk underwriting. And so it opens up the door for these more performance and secure validators and providers to go to their users and say, well, if we can, if we're accepted onto ION or if we're accepted onto other DeFi protocols that build within the same ethos as ION, we actually provide our users a more economic incentive to use our protocol over Lido. And that's something that doesn't really exist right now.
Yeah, I feel there's, you probably see this too, a lot of theater, decentralization theater, a lot of, people self-limit. No, you got to build, and how your guys are thinking and how the Frax team thinks is we have to build the incentives for people to want to take those actions, to want to build a trusted system, to want to choose, one protocol over another. And that's just so important. And people just want to take the easy way out. And the easy way out is just saying, hey, we're going to self-limit. No, you got to take the hard way and build a better product.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's how Sasha probably thinks. So he's probably these guys just got to build better products. I'm sorry.
I mean, yeah, it's true. You got to build a better product. And you got to give it to the Lido team. Phenomenal execution, launched right when the Beacon Chain launched. Was able to they just had the highest yield. They were able to get the integrations early. They weren't the only LST around. Rocket Pool has been around for a long time, and I'm sure they're Anchor. There are plenty of others.
Bifrost. Yeah.
Bifrost. Hell, people were concerned about exchanges for a long time. Being the dominant LST holders like Binance and Coinbase and whatnot, which would have been even way worse.
100%.
Yeah, but
I'll take Lido over them.
I think all of us would take Lido over them as well. But I think what we all want is someone to give Lido a run for their money. It's like at the end of the day, it's like, that's what we
hopefully
want.
we can help get some fighters in the ring. That's the goal.
And like the positive sum nature that we're all espousing, you being open source and what you're building at EigenLayer, and also just how like FrxETH ethos is, like it is possible. Like there is like enough like juice to like get us there.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah. And so that my next question I have about ION is, how does ION achieve sustainability and how does it become profitable? We're getting to the business part.
Business part, fun.
The business part, yeah. The most fun.
Well, I mean, the fun part about kind of lending protocols is like the playbooks there, right?
Yeah.
If we can undercharge on rates, that means there's room for a spread on rates, right? So to earn revenue, right?
Yeah.
Liquidations are commonly a source of revenue. There is product things that we're going to build in the future, which could also generate revenue through rates and fund things like building short-term bonds. Utilize.
Whoa, you can build bonds. Can we get into that?
Yeah, bonds, rate swaps, rate derivatives, a whole bunch of fun stuff. So
you can have like a rate swap on like a exchange, like Hourglass or something.
Yeah, maybe on Hourglass. So listen.
I'm just speculating here.
Yeah, just pure speculation here. But yeah, no, there are a lot of really interesting ways you could build products on top of this core like underwriting and lending platform, which there are pretty obvious ways you could generate revenue from.
Yeah.
And I think like that's optimally our goal. Like, we announced and raised a pre-seed round for the team. But that end state, we want to limit as much outside capital and outside equity that has a hand in the protocol as we can, right? It's our goal to get to a point where ideally we can self-sustain without the dependency on external capital to be able to support us.
That should be the goal of every protocol, honestly, just to be a self-sustaining business.
Yeah, that's
especially in these high interest rates environments.
We hope.
I have one last question, and then we're gonna like wrap up. Go to the lightning round.
I love lightning rounds.
Yeah,
let's do it.
And so, what is the roadmap, both immediate and in the future, for ION? And can users expect a governance framework at some point? Can they expect some responsibility of some sort in the ION protocol?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Good question. So, yes, governance eventually. Governance token, we'll see. No promises there.
Of course not.
Yeah. But let's see. When it comes to roadmap, though, we'll start there. Mainnet before end of year, ideally well before end of year. Ideally, actually, I'll say mainnet before DevConnect. There you go.
Mainnet before DevConnect. You heard it here first on Flywheel. If you save this song, you got your alpha.
Yeah, there you go. Mainnet before DevConnect. I'll say that as much as for sure. We'll have some fun. We'll have ideally 2 products out by the end of the year. This is the plan with us. And so you can look forward to supporting. And when we launch, we'll have support for restaking positions as well as some of your favorite LSTs. We'll have some fun kind of external things that people can interact with, whether or not to you're a searcher or a liquidator looking to interact with our platform, or as you're kind of looking to LP in certain positions, like we'll kind of have a little bit of something for everybody participating. And that will be rolling out before the end of the year, for sure. In terms of after that, what does it look like? The goal, of course, is to kind of broaden our support on mainnet and within that ecosystem and the restaking ecosystem and accepting other restaking platforms and as they come out. The other thing will be to kind of support other proof of stake networks into the future as well. And that's going to become a priority in the coming year is, a lot of the value exists on Ethereum, but there are other kind of proof of stake networks which effectively have a similar system, right? And which we can also kind of replicate our platform on, whether or not those are on L2s or other
the
chains.
First thing that I thought of, actually, like even before you said that, was Bear Chain. I feel like like you.
Fun fact, actually, fun history fact.
Yeah.
The original idea for Ion, I said before that the current idea for Ion was inspired by EigenLayer, which is true. The original idea for Ion, before it is what it is now, was inspired from Berachain.
What was the original idea?
Proof of liquidity as a service. The idea of like being able to spin up like smaller pools of proof of liquidity for specific like middleware and different like iterations of middleware.
Do you see it going full circle and working with the Bear Boys at some point?
I mean, I've thought to it. I think there's totally a path to that.
Yeah. Well, Smokey and Dev Bear, if you're listening, like, you know, hit them up. Or I'll make an intro. Oh,
yeah. Oh, I know those guys.
Oh, you know those guys, yeah.
At least, yeah. I've chatted with Smokey a decent amount of times.
Okay.
I know MVP.
MVP.
Do some stuff, yeah.
Shout out MVP.
We got to chat. When it makes sense, we will definitely work together.
Yeah.
I think right now, you know, they're building out their infrastructure, we're building out ours as well. But once everything kind of comes into fruition, you know, ideally it would become full circle at some point.
I call MVP like because he's such a workhorse, like the concierge of the Berachain ecosystem. He's like at like everyone's like call and like is giving support. So shout out MVP.
Shout out MVP.
Yeah, and shout out all the Bear Boys and shout out EigenLayer. Shout out everyone. We're going to the lightning round for right now. Let's do it. First, Kit has been a bit laggy, so I'm just going to take the question. First question is, when did you first touch the chain? What was your first on-chain experience?
First on-chain experience was not on Ethereum, but was building a Bitcoin mining rig with my dad when I was 12 years old.
That's wholesome. Father-son bonding. Some people have catches.
That was my introduction to crypto. I mentioned that I got introduced to crypto when I was 12. It was my dad trying to build a Bitcoin mining rig, and I was helping him.
Yeah. Next, Kit, are you around? Oh shit. You want to ask the next one? No, he's still laggy.
Still.
Yeah. Next question. Oh no, I'm here.
Nah, it's you, Kit. I'm sorry.
Oh, I remember what it was. What is your favorite off-chain activity? What do you do to touch grass?
What do I do to touch grass?
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. So I do something that doesn't touch grass, was one of my favorite off-chain things. I do something that is a bit more touching grass.
Yeah.
Favorite off-chain thing that's not touching grass, I am a Super Smash Brothers advocate. I love playing that game. I play Elite. And for anyone out there who wants to run, get the ones on in Elite Smash, let's do it.
Heard that.
Yeah. Let's run Captain Falcon main, secondary Falco. Let's do it.
Dude, Captain Falcon. Falcon punch.
Falcon main.
Dude, he doesn't have that good of a jump, but his like captain, like his punch is just so lethal. Like timing of it.
I mean, if you get the right timing, it's a good confidence destroyer.
Yeah. Do you play on like 64 or GameCube or something else?
Oh no, I play Ultimate. Yeah, I play
Ultimate. Ultimate. Okay, got it.
I've been playing ever since GameCube though. I've been playing ever since kid.
I've been playing since
I was like 8.
I've been playing since 64, and I still play 64. I still have, like we still rip the 64, honestly. And but
that's so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, the favorite touch grass one. I love bartending, making drinks. I have a bar set up. Yeah, I have a bar set up in my room, and I just like.
What's your go-to drink?
I'd say usually like nowadays, recently, Corpse Survivor #2 is usually my like a drink.
What's that?
It's like Absolute Rinse, lemon juice. It's gin base, and we did some maraschino cherry usually. Yeah, and it's delicious. As well as but yeah,
delicious. I'm a bourbon guy. Do you make any bourbon drinks?
Bourbon drinks? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of drinks where you could substitute bourbon. I think, like, you know, some people make old fashions with bourbon. I'm more of a raw whiskey guy.
Whiskey, fashions. You're supposed to have bourbon neat anyway, so.
Yeah, like I'd rather drink bourbon neat or
same. Yeah.
Almond box. Like, I actually once did a bourbon tasting thing once where they
me too.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I didn't really realize how much like variability. It was in SF actually.
Oh, it was in SF. Okay, I did mine in Louisville. I went to the Evan Williams Distillery.
So you went to the source.
I went to the source, and they are proud. I can tell you that much. They did their job. They made me a bourbon guy. So like, it was like after that, they converted me. Okay, next question. What would be advice to your younger self?
Ooh, advice to my younger self is so many things. One thing, actually, so here's the one thing I would say that I've done a lot more now. And that's, I think, what helped me do this and start this company is focus on one thing at a time. Like, don't spread yourself too thin. I think a lot of the things I did when I was younger, I tried to do too much at once, and sometimes I diluted myself across like the things I want to focus on. And you know, I kind of lost on a lot of productivity, a lot of depth, some of my knowledge, again, like as a byproduct. And in the times in my life that I made the decision to focus on one thing, it has turned out. I mean, this is a good example. It sounds
like you're giving me advice. This is the thing I try to tell myself the most. Yeah. And last question. Who do you want to see on Flywheel next? Who would you recommend as a guest?
Ooh, who would I recommend on Flywheel next? Ooh, that's so interesting. You want what? A founder?
Anybody you find interesting? Anybody you think would make a good guest?
Have you left the post for people? I
haven't, but I'd really like to, because they're the only other ones that had like a light bulb in my head.
Yeah, I think they'd be fantastic to have on. I highly recommend. I would make the intro. I think they'd be down to it.
I definitely would be down for that, especially after this interview would be a really good follow-up interview. And whenever somebody recommends a guest, they're always phenomenal. So like, the word goes a long way. It helps us. But
tell them to just push them on Rave. I'll give you all the details.
Yeah. The Rave podcast. Yeah. I'm gonna tell them, like, realizing alternative visions for Ethereum. That's what you That's actually one of my favorite DJs, Stu Jones. He has a song called Rave, and it actually stands for Realizing Alternative Visions for Earth.
That's false. Is it about like environmentalism, or is that nothing to do with that?
A little, not really, maybe. Well, I think it's just more of just like general, just commentary. I don't know. He's phenomenal. He's my favorite artist. I'm gonna be there in LA seeing him. So if anybody's in LA and wants to see G Jones, I'll be at that show. He'll be playing with Infra. Anyways, that's it. For this episode, we're wrapping up Ion Protocol. We're wrapping up. Same thing. They're literally the same thing. We're wrapping up Ion Protocol, which Chunda Mccain himself. Thank you so much for coming on. Hope to see you soon, and hope to see you back on the pod and in real life.
Yeah. Ciao.
Thanks. See you guys
later.
Man, that was a hot one. I'm just fanning myself because that was a whole lot of information on this episode of Flywheel. This is the post game. I'm DeFiDave. I'm here with capital K. Chunda, I have to say, Chunda is one of the most articulate people I know in the space. I feel like when he talks, it feels like a warm, intelligent blanket that just is like over my body. I trust this guy. I think this guy, like, he has the right vision. He knows how to build. And even though I understood a good amount of the interview and like the direction that he's going, but I like trust him as a builder and someone who's experienced in the industry it's been around for a bit. Even though he's young, he's been around for like a while. I'm like bullish. I'm bullish Chunda. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there's there's not a lot of pods that I feel out of depth in, but this podcast in particular, this session, I definitely felt a little bit out of depth, and I learned a ton because this is an area in crypto that I am fairly weak in, I would say. But it was great to get an inside look on how someone who's literally building one of the key LSTFi infrastructures are doing today, and what it could look like in the future. So this was a good one for me. I probably had to go back and listen again, definitely to some of the answers, because I was a little fuzzy on certain parts, but I definitely I'm very happy that we had them on. And when they launch, I gotta see it. We gotta bring them back on to talk about post-launch like reflection.
Oh, they launched, or they have like beta out.
Oh, okay. I see. I thought they haven't fully rolled out everything yet, right?
Not fully everything, but they're in the process of launching. They're doing, the whole road tour. So, media tour and everything in between. So happy to get them on. Big fan of Chunda. I am biased though. I met Chunda originally at Zuzulu, in Montenegro, and ended up putting a small angel check there. Yeah. So obvious bias.
Disclosure.
disclosure. But yeah, no, but like honestly, we'll see how the market and builders react to Ion. Everything's moving in the wave of LSTs and building around financial infrastructure, validator infrastructure, credit risk models, methodologies.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's probably like the part that like really got to me. Like, how do you like measure risk in these LSTs like properly underwrite them? It's a mighty challenge ahead. And like they were saying, like, yeah, like somebody could like a big protocol can go fork them, but there's just such a lift to like all the stuff they have to do. Like, and also the Aves and Oilers and whatnot of the world have like already like, they're such big machines already. Like they're not going to like focus on this small area right now. And that's to Ion Protocol's advantage. So good to have Chunda on. Excited to see where it goes in the future. And if you want to keep up with everything, we have our eye on in the future here at Flywheel DeFi. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell button. Let us know what you think in the comments. Leave us a like. Follow us on Twitter, TikTok, and join our Telegram at Flywheel DeFi, all 3 platforms. Make sure you subscribe. Subscribe to our newsletter, flywheeldefi.com.
It really helps. It really helps, please.
Yeah. Acquire a key to access our friend tech for exclusive show notes at Flywheel DeFi. You can follow me on Twitter at DeFiDay22.
Follow me at 0xcapital_K.
And we will see you next week. Peace. Fan my way out of here. Oh, shout out Chuck Beard. Thank you for the fan. Everything said on this episode is not financial or tax advice. This channel is strictly for educational purposes and is not an investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any assets or to make any financial decisions. This video is not tax advice whatsoever. Please talk to your accountant and do your own research.